Uganda holds elections on Thursday with President Yoweri Museveni hoping to extend his 4 decades in power. Supporters of his main opponent, the musician Bobi Wine, allege harassment and intimidation. So what's at stake for one of the world's youngest populations? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Adrian Finighan. Ugandans vote in parliamentary and presidential elections on Thursday, with allegations by the United Nations Human Rights Office of repression during the campaign period. Frontrunner President Yoweri Museveni swept to power after a rebellion 40 years ago and is seeking a 7th term in office. He faces 7 opponents, with Robert Kyagulanyi, better known as Bobi Wine, the most famous. Jailed in the past, Wine says he was beaten, tasered and attacked during the campaign. An international profile with backing from Western musicians has given him near rock star status among a generation of young Africans. Uganda has one of the world's youngest populations, reflected in the election contest. Younger voters seek change, while Museveni supporters welcome the stability they say he offers. In a few moments, we'll speak to our guests about the issues, allegations of repression, and why this contest is being watched keenly beyond Uganda's borders. But first, a report from Alexandra Byers.
It's election season in Uganda. Rallies across the country, but also tear gas and arrests. Polls will open for more than 21 million registered voters on Thursday. In a country with one of the youngest populations in the world, 81-year-old President Yoweri Museveni is seeking a 7th term in office. He came to power in 1986, leading a rebellion, pledging to restore democracy after years of civil war. He's governed since. Longer than 3/4 of Ugandans have been alive.
I was born in 1986, so I've literally only seen one president for now. But the experience I've had from my parents, a bit chaotic, a bit volatile those days.
The young generation have no idea of what happened. I at times hear them say, if it is war, let us go to war. But us who have never witnessed it, jumping over dead bodies while going to school, seeing people take their last breath, personally, I wouldn't want to go back into something like that.
Museveni is credited with stabilizing the country and growing the economy. He says he's the only candidate who can, quote, protect those gains. But critics have long accused his government of using repression, corruption, and abuses to stay in power. Allegations the president has denied. Museveni's main challenger is a man just over half his age, the musician turned politician Bobi Wine, who finished runner-up in the previous election with 35% of the vote. He's promising sweeping reforms to stamp out corruption and address widespread youth unemployment.
We want a country that works for everybody, a country where everybody is going to enjoy full dignity, economically, socially, and politically.
Wine and his supporters say they have faced escalating intimidation and harassment in the run-up to the polls.
It has been tough, almost like a battlefield. Tear gas, live bullets, rubber bullets, and all sorts of intimidation in the campaign trail.
Other government critics say they've been abused in police custody. UN experts have described a pervasive climate of fear, and activists are warning the crackdown on dissent risks undermining the credibility of the elections. But police say they're just restoring order and upholding the law. The military has been deployed to support security operations at polling stations. Museveni is expected to win again, but his margin of victory has been slipping, and he has no clear successor, leaving the door open for a battle for power when he does eventually leave. Alexandra Byers, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Well, Uganda has long been ranked among the world's youngest populations. The last census in 2006 put the population at around 46 million, but it's increased, of course, since then. 75% of its people are younger than 30, and half are younger than 17. 21.6 million people, nearly half the population, have registered to vote. They'll cast their ballots in 3 elections, voting for 8 presidential candidates and electing 353 members of parliament. They'll also cast a special vote for women representatives. 1 for each of the 146 districts will be elected to parliament. Let's bring in our guest. From Kampala, we're joined by Robert Kabushenga, host of the Bad Natives podcast, a Pan-African show that covers politics, society and events impacting the continent. From London, we're joined by Alex Vines, the Africa Programme Director at the European Council on Foreign Relations. And also in Kampala is Joseph Ochieno, a commentator on African affairs. A warm welcome to you all, gentlemen. We did offer Ugandan government officials the opportunity to respond to allegations made by the UN and human rights organisations, but none was forthcoming by the time that we came into the studio. Let's start, Robert, with you then. So Ugandans go to the polls on Thursday, knowing that the winner in this election is almost certainly already decided. Is that democracy, or a confirmation of a political system that no longer allows meaningful challenge?
That would be the view if you were looking at only the presidential election. But the election has a number of offices that are being contested by numerous people. So there is a sense in which, if you look at the presidential election, you would see some kind of coronation or confirmation of the status quo. Be that as it may, I am not sure that I would just confidently state that, because there is no way of us telling how the younger demographic are going to vote. Because one, they are very keen, the younger people are very keen on the election, and they've been voicing their grievances about the lack of opportunity. And some of them feel, a good number of them feel that their future can only be realized through a change. So yes, the campaign process may look like it is going to bring in an outcome that is predetermined, but there is polling day. And so you just never know what people will go and do at the ballot box.
Robert, why then do analysts say that Bobi Wine has almost no chance of winning?
In part because of the stakes for very many players that are involved, whether one, even if the outcome was against the incumbent, would they accept it? You've got to understand that the election, there's lots of factions and groups and interest groups that are invested in the current status quo. That's issue number one. Business interests, political power interests. But beyond that, you also have a sense in which everyone knows or feels that this is Museveni's last term. And therefore, if he wins now, the next 5 years are going to be about transition. So where will you be when the transition process begins? Purely because of age. So that's the sense in which those who may want to play a role in the future may prefer an outcome that keeps him in office, if only briefly, or at least brings him back. Then once they are part of his arrangement, they can be part of any bargain that leads to a transition that takes them into account.
Alex, as we heard, the UN says this election is happening in an atmosphere of repression and intimidation. We saw some of it in Alexandra's report. What does that mean in practical terms on the ground? Hundreds have been arrested, rallies broken up, NGOs shut down. I mean, how far can repression go before it begins to backfire?
Yeah, I mean, there is no level playing field for this election at all. It's been designed, tilted, engineered to favour the incumbent, President Museveni, for his 7th term. So that's very clear. And then he's put his son in charge of the operations to prepare for the election. So General Muhoozi has been given that particular task. And there have been a number of other measures taken. So the Ministry of ICT and National Guidance has made it very difficult to bring in Starlink handsets and paraphernalia. Facebook is still not easily available. registration of journalists coming into to Uganda to observe the elections has been severely curtailed, including from East Africa. So everything's being prepared for an election result that we've been discussing, which is likely to be the return of President Museveni for a 7th term. And there's no guarantee that the internet and social communication will be easily available once the results come in. So there's real concern on that. As your previous speaker said, I do think this election is a lot about transition. So President Museveni is probably will see through a final term if he does get a 7th term. And so a lot of the politics is about the politics of succession already and what's going to happen post-Museveni. So that's the kind of backdrop to this, I think.
We'll come back to the politics of succession in a few minutes. But first, Joseph, do you share Robert's view that anything could happen in this election? It's far from decided yet. Bobi Wine himself says that this is really a protest election. Is that how young Ugandans see it? Wine himself has been jailed, beaten, shot, tortured. What does that tell us about how threatening the state finds him?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Adrian. No, I think I'll totally concur with Robert, and to an extent, severally, some of the suggestions by Alex. Yes, it can only be explained by just that, in terms of uncertainties, in terms of the demographics. That can be the only reason why we see the excesses of security operations. As a matter of interest, the last elections found me in town, and I thought it was the most violent elections in our independence history. I did not see this coming. The first campaign, the first 1 month of the last 3 months campaign, was absolutely generally peaceful. But somehow, the security services started operations that, of course, claim that Robert Chagulanyi's supporters, Bobi Wine, that is basically net cause of this. If you go on to have conversations with people away from the issues, away from the demographics that you're asking me, the only explanation is the uncertainty. And the uncertainty, as partly Robert says, is not necessarily because Chagulanyi comes with anything substantive and substantial beyond his age and beyond the fact that he's a rock star. It is simply because 40 years is rather too long a time. So for those of us, and I think all of us in this program have been around the world and have seen how elections take place, there can be swings in these elections. And although it may not necessarily be the traditions on this continent, and particularly here in Uganda, it is extremely difficult to tell. Why? Because I know friends within the establishment who are generally quite concerned by the manner in which, one, the security services have conducted themselves recently, and two, some of the vagueness with which the Electoral Commission themselves have conducted themselves. So the more you do that and the more you engage citizens and voters across the country, including the much older, my generation kind of voters, people begin to think that, no, I think we're being taken for granted. No, there's an element of impunity here. And no, I think I need to take action. Just the day before yesterday, I think, Adrian, it was extraordinary that a push against a crowd where Robert Chagulanyi was involved. There's a picture of a miserable woman doing the rounds on social media, backed by a tiny little child in mud. I think, if things tilt away from Mr. Museveni, part of the contribution would have been really how they've managed the process of campaigns in the recent past. But in any case, actually, unfortunately, it's really not about elections of issues. All sides are not talking big issues at all. I'm very disappointed, but here we are. Whatever happens, I think we've got 1 day to go, and it will be very interesting what comes out.
Robert, Museveni says he's running again at the age of 81 to protect the gains of peace and stability. After 4 decades in power, what exactly are those gains? Who's benefited from them?
Well, the people who are actively campaigning for him, and these are mainly, as I said, interest groups that have either jobs or businesses or power interests. And you see them on the campaign trail. So, however, I think the attempt at that slogan was an attempt to position his campaign on his historical contribution, because precisely he cannot be the candidate for the future. He just purely because of time, he can't make promises about the future that are long term because he will not be around to ensure that some of the more long-term policy suggestions that he may make may not be implemented in his time. So what you do is you bring him back or you position him as a safe pair of hands as some kind of interim measure. So that's why that slogan has been picked. But you see, with that said, I would like to sort of depart from what Alex was talking about. I think that if we focus a lot or only on the unlevel playing field and the violence and the NGO and the activist world, we miss a very fundamental point of what has happened to the politics of Uganda. In the last 20 years, the politics of Uganda have become hugely commercialized. Politics is a very, very cash-intensive business now. And so what has happened is that the outcome is being determined by groups with huge resources. The violence now really, in my opinion, is those who execute the violence are really attention seekers. The kind of violence that is meted out will not determine the outcome of the election. There was a by-election about 8 months ago, where the election was so violent, but in the end, the opposition won. So, in my opinion, what is in a way driving this election is the money, the people with the organizational skills and interests to try and make sure that this election comes through by hook or by crook. But there is also just the question of whether the Electoral Commission will competently handle the logistics of the election. If we have repeats from the last election where electoral materials arrived 7-8 hours after the polling was supposed to start, then there you can see that clearly the field has been tilted. Because if the Electoral Commission doesn't do that, and by the way, Alex, just to let you know, the UCC, the Uganda Communications Commission, has actually issued a directive about the internet. So they're going to close it. Therefore, when you have developments like that, those show you that there are moves by different interest groups to try and ensure an outcome. So the violence, the intimidation, yes, it's a part of this election, but it's not the character. Well, the character is money and very powerful players.
Let's give Alex the chance to respond to that. Alex, security forces killed, more than 50 people around the last election. How concerned should Ugandans be about violence after this vote? And Museveni's control of the army and police has often been described as total. Is Uganda perhaps best understood as a civilian government backed by the military, or a military system with a civilian face?
Well, not only that, but his son Muhoozi is in the security forces and is leading a lot of these efforts. So you've got kind of family links into this too. And obviously the National Resistance Movement comes out of being a guerrilla force originally. So it has that kind of legacy too. So I remain deeply concerned about after the election results, what will happen. I wonder whether the elections themselves will be so violent, but once results start coming through, and as Robert and myself have highlighted, there's plenty of preparations here to have a very imbalanced playing field. To the extent also that there won't be live broadcasting there isn't live broadcasting of rallies, and the technology to counter official narratives is also being suppressed, such as I mentioned, the inability to bring in significant handsets for Starlink and other things that we see also being oppressed in places like Iran right at the moment. What I do think is that President Museveni and those around him are hoping that they will have more money coming through the system. So again, Robert's point about the economic interests that are behind some of this. Uganda is on the cusp of becoming an oil and gas producer, and in the next few years they will start to be producing oil and gas. And so this is something that I think those around the Museveni are looking for. and are making promises about this. But having said that, also Bobi Wine is promising in a populist way an enormous amount of jobs. He's been talking about 10 million jobs and improving significantly healthcare and social systems. And so a lot of the promises in the elections, I think, are not realistic to the realities that actually Uganda needs to focus on in terms to get the economic growth to accommodate this massive bulge of young people who need meaningful employment and life and job opportunities.
Joseph, do you want to pick up on that, about the promises that are being made? What role is oil playing in this election? Do you also want to touch on the role of political succession, as Robert was saying and Alex was saying, that Museveni's son is very much involved in at least the security surrounding this election?
Totally so. In fact, if anything, one of my good friends, Sarah Berete, is behind bars in recent weeks, and simply because she's a renowned world activist on constitutionalism, and in fact one of the leaders of election monitoring groups on this continent. And she's behind bars simply because of being seen to be overcritical and perhaps being put aside so that, some of the conversations we're having today is not magnified slightly more. So that is one. And then number two, of course, there are suggestions that some of those actions and activities are related, unfortunately, to Mr. Museveni's son, who happens to be, in effect, the commander of the security forces, meaning the army. But also next to that is the fact that it has been known that Mr. Museveni's son has positioned himself as the almost a heir apparent successor in his father's administration. And Robert Post will tell you that part of what we're discussing today is not necessarily change, meaning the change has already taken place, and that the powers that be are basically effectively in the hands of Mr. Museveni's son, and they're the ones possibly at the moment telling Ugandans that, well, you dare not, because here we are not only in charge, but we are in charge and ready to whip you. Within the NRM as an establishment, it should appear some of the old guys who came with Museveni 40 plus years ago seem to be actually now today the slightly more apparent moderates, but they're either voiceless or they've been pushed aside. Next is the conversation around other political players away from Robert Chagulanyi, where again, as Robert Kabushenga, my good friend on the program, is suggesting, people are positioning themselves in terms of transition. So people want to talk nice to Mr. Museveni, talk nice to his son, but in the background also talk nice amongst themselves in terms of what happens over the next few years should those changes do take place. All those kind of conversations really don't help us to have an opportunity like in this election, where we'd be having a big election on issues, which brings me to the issue that you raised, that today would be having a conversation around, if you're talking jobs, how are you going to get them, which sectors, which areas, Joseph, and where you're going to get the resources.
I'm sorry to cut you short, Joseph. We're rapidly running out of time, and I've got so many questions I want to ask. Robert, I need a relatively short answer from you too. Museveni, of course, has cultivated economic ties with China, with Russia, the UAE, as well as many Western nations. Does that perhaps give him more pressure, more freedom, rather, to ignore pressure over democracy?
I don't think so, because of the changes that are already taking place. The geopolitical changes taking place mean that actually it's more likely that Museveni is either a friend of or from the past rather than the present. So I don't think that that's very much a factor in his play. I think what is in his play is whether he is able to ride this election through, come back in, and then probably begin organizing. Of course, there is the fact that the Western world is no longer pushing the line of democracy and human rights. So that gives him a bit of room. But he's also conscious of what has happened to Tanzania and Kenya in their violent response to protests.
All right, well, let's put that point to Alex. Western governments, as Robert said, seem to be turning a blind eye, even though they are vocally critical of Uganda's human rights records. But they rely on Museveni for security, refugees, counter-terrorism. Is that effectively a green light for repression?
Well, certainly. I mean, the United States, for example, and the Netherlands have had agreements with the Museveni administration in terms of returnees, migrants. So President Museveni is trying to ensure that he has a diverse number of relationships which blunt any criticism on human rights, good governance, and the results of these elections, probably. That is his game plan. And as Robert said, I think the plan is to get through this election and then focus on the politics of succession that will then start to quicken. President Museveni has also been, as Robert said, watching very closely what just happened in Tanzania with its elections, but what's also happened in Kenya, but indeed a couple of years ago in Mozambique also, and the dangers that a large youthful population pose to incumbents.
Joseph, if, as expected, Museveni wins again on Thursday, what kind of country does Uganda become next? A stable, strongman state anchored by oil and its military, or a society where a young, restless generation are going to keep pushing out of frustration until something finally gives?
I think if we were having this conversation 12 months ago, we would be saying that if Museveni did win, we would be seeing a much more modest Museveni, a guy full of humility, and by and large, once in a while, he presents himself as such. But as I said at the beginning, I mean, Mr. Museveni seemingly is not fully in charge. It would appear the forces around his son are slightly on the stronger end. And so that means that an outcome post-Museveni, which favors Museveni, is one which is going to grant slightly much more uncertainty. I think it's incumbent upon the political leaders from across the political divide and indeed civil society organizations to push and push more to make sure that, well, there is an open debate, a possibility of a national conference, a possibility of languages around national truth and reconciliation, so that we're able to try and calm down spaces in which people like the Musevenis don't look behind themselves in their backs behind, because actually some of their backgrounds are not particularly good. But I think my two colleagues are also right that Mr. Museveni must be looking around what happened in the neighboring countries. He managed to play the West particularly well on blackmails on Congo, on Rwanda, on Sudan, on Somalia, and thus far it helped and worked for him. But where we are at the moment is neither here nor there. I think quite critical is how we ourselves as Ugandans are able to balance that. I think it's incumbent upon Robert and myself and all political leaders and really all citizens of this country to try and be able to make sure that we create that enabling environment in which there is a national conversation post Mr. Museveni, who plays the moderating role. Unfortunately, that's a difficult question. For the moment, it's not necessarily going to be purely Western, because Mr. Museveni managed to play Russia, China and the US at the moment in such a manner that, well, really it's very difficult to tell who really holds the barrow when it looks to a direction in terms of pushing Museveni's influence in terms of a direction where he takes beyond here. But whatever happens, I think Ugandans just need to make sure that, well, they avoid violence and they survive for the next day. Okay.
Gentlemen, there, I'm afraid we must end it. We're out of time. Many thanks indeed, Robert Kabushenga, Alex Vines and Joseph Ochieno for being with us today. And thank you for watching. You can see the programme again at any time by going to the website. That's at aljazeera.com. For further discussion, join us at our Facebook page at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And of course, you can always join the conversation on X. Our handle there at AJ Inside Story. From me, Adrian Finighan, and the team here in Doha. Bye for now.